Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Virtual Dance Exchange Project Symposium Dialogue number 2. I'm Bianca Johnson, a New York City-based teaching artist and choreographer and a member of the Virtual Dance Exchange Project. Tonight, I'm co-moderating this discussion with my dear friend and colleague, Shayna Simmons of Shayna Simmons Dance. Also on this call are the other two founding members of VDEP, Crystal Brown, a Pittsburgh-based cultural teaching artist, and Karen Alexander of XR Connected. Tonight, we focus on equity and cultural diversity in dance and tech education. Our panelists are Lindsay, Renee Benton, choreographer, dancer, assistant professor of dance at Alabama State University, VBOM, a multimodal performance artist, and artistic and executive director of Bohemian Way, Max Dennison, Digital Equity and Inclusion Manager for the City of Pittsburgh, and Aileen Barry, Senior Director of Education and Outreach at the National Dance Institute. As a reminder, this dialogue presentation is being recorded. And remember, these conversations are designed for you, the audience. Feel free to ask the panelists questions throughout the discussion by writing in the chat. Crystal and Karen will make sure your questions are heard. And now, without further ado, I'm happy to turn the evening over to the woman that started this all, Shayna Simmons.
Hey, everyone. Thank you, Bianca, for that wonderful introduction. I don't think I'm used to that. So, yeah, welcome. This is the Virtual Dance Exchange Project's third symposium. What we like to call VDEP is a collective of 4 women that Bianca just showed you. We've been meeting together for the past year, pretty much every week, and pretty much for anywhere from 2 to 4 hours to create this diverse kind of program that we're showing. VDEP is supported by the Arts Equity Reimagined Fund. We had applied for that grant award back in January and received the word that we could move forward with the project fully supported. And basically, it was in response to COVID-19, reimagining ways that arts and technology can either blend together or how we can reinvent the world and the ways we're currently functioning. So we really kind of dug in and talked about a variety of topics for the past year, and that being one of them. What manifested were these 2 tracks. So we have the online performances that are filmed in 360-degree technology, which you can still catch online if you haven't seen them through November 20th. Very cool things. And then we also have this 3-part symposium. Dialogue number 1, we featured 3 weeks ago. You can still catch it online on YouTube if you missed. This meeting will be recorded and distributed in the same fashion. So even if you have to jump out or you want to send it to a friend, we're going to be recording this evening. And then the third one is 3 weeks from now, and that one's really exciting. It's what is possible in arts and technology now. So feel free to join us for dialogue number 3 as well. We're really hoping that these conversations between the panelists and you will create and spark new ideas that intersect dance and technology, as well as build communities. So that's how we're trying to kind of look at things differently and see how we can reimagine our world that we're currently living in. So for now, we're going to see what the team has been up to. We have a short little video to show you. So roll that clip, Jonathan. All right. Thanks for bearing with us through that. I hope just let us know in the Zoom chat again if you are having any issues. Thank you for letting us know that sound wasn't coming through. Hopefully it's feeding correctly now. So welcome to our dialogue number 2, equity and cultural diversity in dance and tech education. Sorry, I have to read that because I just want to make sure I'm saying my own title right. So this kind of dialogue, and we're about to lead into the panelists, but I just wanted to give you a brief background. It's based on conversations that the VDEP team has had about dance education, speaking from the perspective from youth all the way up to professional development. So we kind of had a lot of talks about what that means, how that affects you. And then also with that, does lack of opportunity or what opportunities exist for educational development in both dance and technology, and how does that affect a human? How does that develop a human's awareness and perspective of these things? And then also on top of that, how does that build the city that you live in? How does that build the dance community? How does it build what you're aware of or used to or comfortability with using technology? And how does education play a role in that? And specifically within a lens of how does diverse cultural education affect these things as well. We're really shining a light on Pittsburgh, trying to compare the functionality and kind of what's happening here to other cities. And again, we're just going to start to have some conversation about it. So I'd like to introduce Lindsay Renee Benton as our first panelist. And Lindsay, I just kind of wanted to start with, tell us a little bit about yourself. Maybe talk to us a little bit about your perspective and your experience with education, your dance training, any kind of education and technology that you might have accrued, and kind of take us on a small journey from youth and talk about your experiences a little bit. And then really kind of where we started talking before was in your master's level, kind of the ideas that started to infiltrate how academia, views you and grades people. So go ahead, take it away for a few minutes.
All right, let me try to get through this timeline. Thanks for having me, by the way. This is an awesome opportunity, and I'm so glad that you guys have created this platform. So I'm originally from the Rust Belt area, born and raised in Youngstown, Ohio, not too far from Pittsburgh. And I actually spent quite a bit of time in Pittsburgh while I was living in Ohio. After I was in probably middle school, it was decided that, she really is concerned and very interested in dance. And so, my parents, when I say drove all over the tarnation to make sure that I had the best things to be exposed to. As far as the arts were concerned, that was a huge, huge endeavor that they committed to, mainly because resources and agency did not exist in the way that it does in a lot of larger arts communities or bigger cities. And so in order for me to see people who looked more like me, my parents had to drive everywhere. But that led me to be inspired to want to study in college. And I went on to Howard University and studied dance there. And then once I was in the middle of my senior year, I was able to audition for Garth Fagan Dance. And I went back and forth from college to upstate New York to finish my degree and also perform with the company. I was able to perform as a principal senior dancer for about 5.5 years. And then I decided I wanted to take some of my talent back to my hometown because it was still, a need that was growing there to expose youth to the arts and ideas of how they can pursue it as a professional career. So I had a dance school there for a while. In the midst of that, I decided to go to grad school. And I believe, Shauna, this is what you're talking about as far as some of my views inside academia and what that meant for me as a Black female dance artist. I saw that being the only Black woman in my cohort, and actually the only person that was Black in my cohort, the university the program did not have all of the language that I believe was necessary to actually evaluate any of my work. And so my lens that I used to create, as well as develop my research and practice and methodology that eventually became part of my thesis, was using a lens of Afrofuturism as a moving sigil, meaning all of symbolism and all of the meaning behind it, I wanted to make sure that I was helping to tell narratives and tell stories of pushing Black into the future. And so I had to create a glossary, basically create my own rubric so that I could be evaluated accordingly. And that became a huge undertaking, to say the least, but also it was something that I knew that was necessary, because if you do not have the language, understanding, or reference to be able to evaluate because of cultural specificity, then there's a great deal of struggle when it comes to understanding other people, and then also accurately helping them either produce or analyze their work. So as an educator now, one of the things that I'm extremely conscious of is making sure that I do not dismiss people's experience in an effort to educate them. Teaching at an HBCU and also having gone to an HBCU, I see the great value in having people who have incredible accomplishments that you can look up to, who can also steer you into the direction that you would like to go based on you being able to see yourself, being able to have a nice proximity to people who look like you and are on or have gone through the same path that you hope to endeavor is a huge deal. And also having that understanding at the same time. So as an educator, I continue to look for ways to be able to invest and embrace Black culture. I'm here in the South, and so it's definitely different than what I was experiencing and living in when I was up north or further up on the coast, the East Coast. So yeah, that's part of my experience.
Yeah, I love that. It's just so truly, I think, inspiring. And I mean, you just speak with such passion and knowledge. It's really inspiring to me just to listen to you. So thank you for sharing that. Mm-hmm. I do have a little follow-up question, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but two things. You had mentioned your experience with Garth Fagan's dance company, and that was a pretty full-time 5-year, experience. And I was curious as to if there was any differences between, that kind of company structure or that kind of learning environment of what you were training in, what you were doing, and how did you translate that to any kind of programming in a smaller town environment? Did it translate? Were there differences in approach? So that just kind of came to mind if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I believe the first part of your question, as it related to dealing with transferring into a professional environment. One of the beautiful things about training with people who have been on this path before is that the standard that they create is based on professionalism and professional dance world. So it's not just, it's good enough for college, it's good enough for this grade. No, how does this translate? One of the things that one of my professors told me, I believe it was probably my freshman or sophomore year, Patricia Thomas, she was my modern gram teacher. And she said, don't dance for the stages that are inside this building on this campus. Dance for the stages that you want to be on. And so, that are all over the world. And so that was part of the mentality of the training. And so it was not as hard a transition in terms of balancing what professionalism meant as a dance artist. It was more so, this is the real test. Applying what we've been trained to do and what we've already been accustomed to doing inside of this thing that I'm being paid to do now and, committed to, signing on dotted lines and whatnot. So, and then as far as the small town and the arts mentality, I think that one of the things that was necessary for me to do was to create incentives that aligned with goals that we wanted, participants or other artists that I was working with to reach. And by incentive, I just mean in terms of being able to see how aligning yourself with certain standards translates to that same professional life that I was trained for and, also wanted to pass down to those that I encountered. So the biggest challenge of that is the allocation of resources. So, seeing the value of of this specific thing, whether it's requires more funding or more participation or just even more exposure, and seeing how that translates into the benefit for whether it's children, a larger community, or just the presence of how the arts enrich lives on a regular basis.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So yeah, we'll come back to you. Don't worry. Don't go anywhere. We are going to turn to Maximilian Dennison right now. And hello, Max. Thank you for being here. I just wanted to start with kind of where you grew up. What was your educational experience like from youth? You went to college, you were inspired to go to college. What was all of those experiences like along the way for you? And where did you pick up technology? When did that interject into your life?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Max Dennison, Digital Inclusion Coordinator for the City of Pittsburgh, native of Pittsburgh, native of the City of Pittsburgh. My start was on the Hill District, and then later on into the Highland Park area. And traditional education, went to Pittsburgh Public Schools, then went on to Shinley High School and University. My background is actually in education. Originally, I wanted to be a teacher, so I kind of always knew I wanted to be in education. I always kind of knew that I wanted to work with children and work with students. I didn't know in what capacity. Originally, I thought I would be a teacher. My minor was my bachelor's in political science. My minor was in history. So I went on and to get a master's in education as well. And then I went into the workforce to actually work in Pittsburgh Public Schools. So originally, I thought I was just going to be in education and be a teacher. My experience in the teaching field wasn't exactly what I thought it was going to be. When I got there, there's a lot of bureaucracy. There's a lot of things that are going on that were happening in education that weren't exactly what I signed up for. I kind of had this vision from a movie, I guess you could say, somewhat of a delusion of, we're going to go in there, you're going to teach these kids, they're going to go to Harvard, it's going to be like just a perfect scenario, and that wasn't necessarily the case. There's a lot of things that need to happen in the school system, a lot of conversations that need to be had. So at some point, I made a decision that I wanted to transition out of traditional education, but I still wanted to kind of work with students. I went back to school for tech, and the idea pretty much came from I do a lot of reading. I read a lot of articles. And we had a whiteboarding session, me and a few friends, and we have this whiteboarding session every year, and we kind of just talk about our dreams, our aspirations, our ambitions. And, the question comes up of, if you could do anything right now, if you're not already doing what you want to do, what would you do? And I said, hey, I want to be in technology. I actually want to run a startup. I don't know if it was from me watching the show Billions. I'm not exactly sure, but I knew in my mind that if I could do anything, I would run a startup or be in some type of technology business. And shortly after that, I re-enrolled back in school, started taking courses in technology, learned how to code, learned how to program. Once I had the information and the skill set to actually code, learn how to build websites, create applications, I was already in the education field. I was still teaching while this is happening. I had asked the principal at the time, could I create a program around coding after school, and she told me as long as I didn't need any money to finance it, it was fine. So we created a program around technology, and there wasn't a huge plan in the beginning. It was just a need. When I would speak to students, speak to kids, African American students, kids that look like myself in the neighborhood, in the community, they didn't necessarily know about technology. They didn't know about artificial intelligence, even though they're using it every day when they're texting or when they're playing a video game. They didn't know about machine learning. They didn't know about robotics. They didn't know about all these different fields and these opportunities. And just being in the field and learning how to code in the program, I know how important these things will be in the future. So for me, it was like, hey, there's a need here. We should start courses. And we just started our first classes, simple with maybe 5 to 7 students that I had already been working with. And we started programming. I had posted it on my social media, and then a bunch of parents started to reach out to me and say, hey, how do we sign our kids up? And, from that moment on, I knew that, there were other people interested. There were other parents concerned about the future. And also knowing that, in many of the schools, whether it's public school or charter schools, there aren't a lot of classes in technology. There aren't a lot of courses that are preparing these students for 21st century skill sets. It's a lot of traditional schooling still happening. So we knew there was a problem, and we just began to fill the void. And, now we've worked with over 500 students over the course of maybe 6 years. We're doing incredible things now with the city, also with the company that we formed called Beta Builders. And that's still the rallying cry, is to make sure that we get more women, more young Black and brown students in the space, and basically just normalize tech in all of the communities and areas that we serve.
Absolutely. Yeah. So a couple of little questions for you. So the youth program that you currently run, is it even dedicated to youth, first of all? But do you have any specific outcomes? Like what is the goal of teaching this population what you're about to teach? And whenever that happens, is there a vision for them? What do they do with that? Where do they go from there?
Right. So I think the overall, in a perfect world, the overarching vision would be for these young students to become computer scientists, come back into the ecosystem in a city like Pittsburgh and be able to have a great long career, and then hopefully teach it to their children or teach or mentor some other students. And we're getting there. We actually have students that have come back and done some minor mentoring, or coming back and just helping in the program. The goal, depending on where you start, if you start at 10 years old, it's just about exposure and access, being on the keyboard, understanding computers. And I always say there's a difference between computer programming and computer science. I think the science of the computer is really understanding what the computer is doing. But actually programming is when you start to develop and build programs inside of the computer. So depending on where you're at, what age, depends on the development, but hopefully we can get you to start with the basics, be able to start to create basic websites with HTML, CSS, get you then into some of the more high level JavaScript, Python, which are the languages that are the main ways to get a job in this industry, in the workforce today. So once you can start to manipulate the screen, build your own websites, we hopefully can get you to upload your work to GitHub, which is like a huge repository for all programmers to upload their work. It's actually where, if you were to apply for a job at Google or Amazon, they would probably go look at your GitHub account and see what type of portfolio you have. So we want the students to create that same portfolio, almost to, to set them on that on-ramp, so that when they get to computer science in college, or when they apply for that job, or if they go even to a boot camp or take a Coursera course, they have a body of work they could go back and look at and say, hey, I've been developing for X amount of years. I have this amount of experience and I'm ready to work, or I'm at least able to learn enough that if you hire me, I can pivot and be able to do what you need me to do. That's the ultimate goal, to create jobs and sustainable living.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think that kind of a program is so perfect for that. I just think it's a great vision, and, hopefully it's succeeding, and all these things. And it resonates in an artistic way as well. I think there's a potential there for dance education to filter in similar, trajectories, I think. So yeah, awesome. Thank you. Okay, let's pass it over to Aileen Barry. I first met Aileen 2004, I want to say, way back in New York City. And she is the Senior Director for Educational Programming and Outreach, right, for the National Dance Institute. And thank you so much for being here. So Aileen, I wanted to start with your background a little bit, and what was your education like growing up until now? And then, what brought you to National Dance Institute? How did you plop in there? And what did you have to offer that they were like, yes, you're the person?
Oh, thanks, Shana. First, I just want to say that I'm grateful to be in this conversation. I'm learning so much already. I hope that I can continue to be part of it beyond this evening, because I think the questions you're raising about how to make home a sense of home and create a true sense of belonging, whether it's in a neighborhood, a city, or in a school community, what beloved community really is, and how the arts are a vital force in building that. I think that's some of the most important stuff we can be talking and thinking about at this time, is, especially as we all emerge and as we think about the world we want to make. So I'm grateful to be here. And I think, I'm going to say something so cliched, but it is true. It's that I am a person who was totally formed by arts educational experiences as a young person, and by participating in community theater, and by putting on a show as a kid over and over with different groups of people. I grew up in the New York City area, and the people who are still nearest and dearest to me in my life are not, classmates from that time. They're like cast members from that time in my life. And I think all of the experiences we underwent, being vulnerable, being part of something bigger than any of us as an individual, but this great creative enterprise with, struggle attached to it, hard work, positive risk taking, so much, development of empathy, engagement with big ideas, all of this stuff that happened was really what made me. And I can't separate myself at all from learning in, through, and with the arts. And so that's how I came to National Dance Institute. I studied theater in college, also music and dance. I thought I would have a life as a practicing artist, maybe as a theater director. I think that was my ultimate goal. I co-founded and led a very small nonprofit off Broadway theater company for a while. But my work at NDI, what I realized, I think, is that what's most important to me is, again, the sense of being part of something larger than myself, that is meaningful, that is of service to the world. And I care passionately about public education, and I love being around young people. And I work for National Dance Institute, as you said, and the best way I can sell NDI is to say that I have worked at NDI with people like Bianca Johnson for 20 years. And of course, that's where I met you, Shana. So it's a place that attracts extraordinary people and does meaningful work. I don't know how you said, how did I land there? And what do I have to offer? I mean, I'm continuously trying to live up to the responsibility I have at NDI. But, I think we are a group of people that believes deeply that in our founder's mission. NDI was founded by Jacques d'Amboise about 46 years ago, that learning in the arts is the birthright of every person, that public education should have the arts as core subjects, as integral and central to learning, not extracurricular, not peripheral. That the arts are uniquely able to help all of us access our own innate and unique excellence and hone that and share that with the world. The arts are how we become our fullest self. So, I believe that, and I passionately believe that, and I'm surrounded by people who believe that in NDI. So I'm glad to be part of it.
Yeah,
Did I answer
absolutely.
all your questions?
Yeah, no, that's perfect. I
Yeah.
wanted to delve into, what do you, not what do you do, but I mean, what is some of the either challenges of working with a public school system? Like what's the knowledge that you have to know? And like as your role, and then we had talked about like any kind of New York City programs opportunities that exist versus any Pittsburgh opportunities that exist, and didn't know if you had any information or comparisons about either working with school systems that are already in place, or just kind of from a nonprofit perspective, how does that filter in?
Sure. I should probably explain a little bit about what NDI actually does. We work with about 6,500 children in elementary schools, partnering with schools through a New York City Department of Education vendor contract. So we serve the public schools of New York City, and we teach dance as part of the school day, as really a core curricular subject in the partner schools that we serve. We work with every child on a grade or a series of grades, implementing a sequential dance curriculum. We teach in teams of 3 teaching artists, 2 dancer choreographers, and a musician. So there's live music in every class, and our teaching artists really are practicing artists who understand the rigor of a life in the performing arts, and who live that, and who also are expert teachers who really are passionate about the craft of teaching, which is an overlapping but different skill set. And so they are people who dedicate their lives to teaching the arts in schools. Our programs often are full year, multi-year. Often our partnerships are decades long with schools and communities throughout New York City. And we culminate our programs in performances that are not just products, but really meaningful opportunities to galvanize a whole school around a celebration of what children can do, and their power and their excellence and their beauty. And we use dance and the arts as catalysts to help children, as I said earlier, actualize and become their fullest and best selves. So the questions about sort of, what Pittsburgh looks like versus what New York City looks like, the comparisons are so difficult to make. The scale of what's happening in New York City is so vast, 1.1 million students, 1,800 schools. I mean, it's an enormous system and ecosystem with some tremendous assets and tremendous work to do to ensure equitable, accessible, inclusive arts education opportunities, the ones that all children and all students need and deserve. Tremendous work to do. There are some helpful things that I can say that I think guide and support our work in arts education in New York City that could be informative. And I'll be brief, but it was after we had our initial conversation, Shana, and I thought, okay, let me do a lot of Googling and like get a really clear picture of what's happening in arts education in Pittsburgh so that we can talk about it. That piece was hard. I mean, it's hard to find out what's happening and what the ecosystem is. And I think, what we benefit from in New York City, even with all the work there is to do, are very clear standards, not only the National Core Arts Standards that New York State, follows, but curriculum blueprints in the arts that were written by and for artists and educators in New York City that are deep, thoughtful, robust. They contain benchmarks, through the grades K to 12 for what a really rigorous, robust dance education, and these exist for all the arts disciplines, dance education should look like. So that's helpful. There's also, you have in Pennsylvania and you have in Pittsburgh minimum requirements for arts education. These are not the ceiling, these are the floor. This is the minimum amount of arts learning in each of the disciplines that students should have. I wasn't able to really get a very clear picture of what those requirements are, or how they're borne out, in the curricular standards, and who's carrying out this arts education, who's meeting these mandates and requirements in Pittsburgh. In New York City, there's an annual Arts in Schools report. There's a lot to be said about what's happened in New York City, the journey of arts education in New York City from the 1970s when NDI was founded to now. Lots of, there have been some positive periods of funding and more accountability, dedicated arts funding, then that's stripped away, another wave, crashes and arts education is diminished. But recently, in addition to standards, I'll say the words transparency and accountability. The transparency comes in the state of the arts reports that we get, so we can see what's happening. We know how many schools have certified arts specialists. We know how many schools have resident arts organizations and cultural organizations, how many schools have dedicated space for arts learning, and how many schools are participating in things like field trips and external performances, or visiting artists who are doing performances. So, and then when we can analyze that data, we see where there are gaps, where there is injustice, and where we need to intervene. I'm not one to say the word standards accountability a lot. I do probably say transparency a lot, but I think these are helpful phenomena in New York City that I, just in looking for data on Pittsburgh, I struggled a bit to find that. So I don't know if that's instructive, but I offer it as a starting point.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's completely, perfect. Yeah. Okay, cool. We'll take a pause with you. I wanted to go to VBOM, and thank you so much, V, for being here. And again, same kind of question. I wanted you to start with telling us a little bit about your journey. When did your dance education start? What was that like for you into collegiate dance, if you did that? And then, you had some time in Pittsburgh with a professional contract, but you were branching out into other modes of performance. So was that always a part of your life? When do you think that kind of multidisciplinary, kind of intervention, and then past that, you talked about what you've been working on to become a multimodal performance artist. So if you just kind of wanted to take us a little bit through that educational experience for you. And she might be having some connection issues. Cool. All right, she's in. Okay, V, give us a second. Let's see what's going on there. And so we'll come back to V in a second, but I wanted to actually ask Aileen a little bit into our next kind of like dual question. And Aileen, if we wanted to go back to you real quick, just to answer one more question. And the question is, how does dance education feed a city's cultural institutions? So we had talked about prior in as far as, just kind of through the years of youth education and dance and the opportunities that kids can filter into certain already institutions that exist. So didn't know if you had any kind of like specific examples of how that works and when that works.
Sure. Can I just circle back to something I said about standards, transparency, and accountability. I think these are good words and necessary ones. They're just often in an educational context used, I think, in the wrong ways. And that's why I sort of intimated that, but they're important. And yeah, we're thinking about institutions. We're thinking about, Shana, is this question specifically about welcoming youth into institutions, welcoming students from an educational context as audience or as participants, or is it more about professional development, opportunities for advancement in the art forms? Tell me more about what you want to know.
Yeah, I think, well, I actually had both of those questions, but this one in particular was about less of exposure or audience participation, that kind of stuff, but more about the trajectory into professional development. And, or, you know, if you are, you know, if you come out of New York City education and you have this arts experience, or anyone in general, anywhere, but do those, I mean, do they become philanthropists? You know, is that like a stronger presence, do you think, in New York City? Maybe because people are from New York City, maybe they're not, I don't know. But, you know, just kind of what that kind of experience and exposure would be is part of the educational system.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a complex question and consideration. I mean, I think at the most basic level, you know, it's deeply true that unless any of us has opportunities to learn experientially and in a robust participatory way in the arts, and unless we get to experience the arts and respond to the arts and connect to works of art in personal ways and critical ways, and unless we have those kinds of experiences, we can't become adults who understand the value of the arts. We don't become arts patrons. Certainly, we often, I think, don't feel that institutions and venues welcome us, that we belong there, unless we've had these formative experiences as youth. And I think, you know, I think it's the responsibility of organizations and institutions to consider this, not only from a practical perspective, that they're, you know, that they're rearing next generations of audiences and potentially donors, as you referenced, but because it should be core to the mission of any institution or organization to exist, to serve its community in a real and authentic way, to have a reciprocal relationship, to be in conversation with, to provide entry points of all kinds through programming, through internships, through, you know, employment opportunities, all of that.
I also, I wanted to ask Max, if we could get Max back on the screen, if you both could comment on, Max, like how does that relate to technology in education for you? Does any of that resonate in similar patterns or fashions as far as trajectory of like a, you know, a person's possible career path or opportunities that could exist, that kind of a thing?
Yeah, I would say I think every situation is slightly different, but just the opportunity, exposure to be able to do that, yes, I do think it resonates in tech. But you know, I think the most difficult thing when I'm talking about tech is that there's so many different avenues and ways to get there, and there's so many. You know, I would be remiss to say that I knew all the different ways and avenues. I know, you know, the spaces that I'm in and the direction that I try to send the students. But literally, because, you know, myself, just to give you an example, me and my co-founder, the way we both have a perspective and look at tech is completely different. He's a 25-year-old graduate from a university, and I'm in my mid 30s, and I pivoted in the middle of my career. So our idea on trajectory and scale is so much different, and the world is so different and moving so much more quickly. But yeah, I definitely believe there's similarities there. Absolutely.
Cool. And then let's see if V's back. V, can you try speaking? I am still not. Are you hearing her? I am not hearing her. Okay. Okay, well, let's see if there is, I mean, I could FaceTime her. Yeah. All right. Well, I did also have a few more questions. So Lindsay, I was going to say, this is kind of like a Lindsay Max dialogue. Lindsay, could you go back to your work and experience with Dance on Screen Alabama a little bit, or what your experience with technology and dance is? And then,
Sure.
yeah, just kind of like how technology has opened accessibility into dance and choreography in your experience, or what you've, seen.
So actually, part of that journey began for me while I was in grad school, with using the idea or premise of Afrofuturism as my lens to create from. And ideally, as choreography develops, I'm always trying to figure out how to infuse that as, technology is here. That's just where we are. And so there's been points in which I've been able to utilize artist participation simultaneously with audience participation through the use of technology, projections, Isadora, the software, and tablets. So like all of those things have had an influence in my process, as well as just performance offerings in general. When I was actually on set for Coming to America 2, it dawned on me that my students, a lot of them had not had this experience. In traditional dance training environments, the push is for dancers to be on stage. And not until more recently that there's been a lot more adapting to dancers being on screen, whether that's for music videos, for Netflix musicals, or, whatever the case may be. And so commercial dance world has not been tapped into on an academic level as nearly as much, obviously, as the concert world has. So I decided to create Dance on Screen Alabama, also known as Dosabama, where it's a dance on screen training program as well as festival. So we're into our second year of it, last year being the first during COVID, which was kind of ideal just because everyone was forced to either view or participate in Dance on Screen in some way. So the idea that dance can only be seen or understood or experienced in one way that's completely, being abolished because of technology. And so my primary concern was that technology is often one of the things that dancers, artists in Black communities don't get the opportunity to experience until, 10 years beyond it being obsolete. So with that in mind, I wanted to make sure that I brought in some industry professionals to serve as creative directors who could take the students all the way through the treatment writing process to, post-production editing and, submissions for festivals and whatnot. So that process was extremely rewarding, as students were able to see how the application of what they were learning in the studio was important to add to the technology, and not that one should be more valuable than the other, but these things, with the proper directing or direction, I should say, they can work together and produce amazing results as well as new methodologies so that we can experience art. And so as an artist and choreographer, I am extremely excited when those moments happen on a pre-professional as well as professional level for students I work with, as well as professional artists that I have the opportunity to also work with.
Cool. Yeah, Max, you looked like you had a little gleam in your eye when she was talking. Did that do you understand what she's saying? Is my question.
Not specifically. I just like the idea of Afrofuturism. I just think that's cool. It's always, I think, important to be culturally relevant. Even just to tie it into tech, 40% of the students that we service are women, and I tell people how important it is for a woman to see a woman, and no matter what color, ethnicity, just the same way it's important for young African American men to see an African American male programming and coding. When we spoke before. I told you how important it was in the environment that I grew up in. There weren't necessarily any examples specifically for a programmer or an engineer. So whenever you see that, and I just know how important cultural relevance is to every aspect, and I'm sure it's very important in dance. But I just think the title is cool as well.
Yeah, awesome. Definitely, I agree.
Thank you.
So we have a audience question, and then I want to hit up with V. So the Pittsburgh has a great tradition of educational television. So wondering if there was any equivalent today that would compare to Pittsburgh's history of educational television. And I also, Pia, I think her name's Pia, I can't actually see, but Pia, is that in relation to artistic television education or
Mr. Rogers?
Yeah, Mr. Rogers, completely, absolutely. Yeah, so I didn't know, maybe it's a matter of, Mr. Rogers developed this whole, wonderful program, and what's happening today in either arts and technology, maybe. Anyone have any comments where you are?
Nothing compares to Mr. Rogers. But I mean, maybe there is something. I just saw some video from Hip Hop Harry the other day. I didn't even know that was a thing. I thought it was just a meme. It was real.
Yeah, the only thing I know of, and I wouldn't even say it's educational TV, but it's is it Marquee, that program that is, I think it's called Marquee TV, which airs recorded performances that would be like coming out of London or something. So it's a little more international. But yeah, is there, Max, do you know of any tech TV programming, or aside, like, I guess we operate in blog format and YouTube.
Yeah, I was going to say, I want to make sure and be careful I don't speak on anything I don't know about. So I am familiar with Mr. Rogers, and I know that like QED and some of those stations still exist. In what capacity, I'm not necessarily sure, but so much of tech is digital, online apps, streaming, kind of what we're doing right now. So, I'm just not sure where the ties are with tech at this moment, but I'm sure there's some out there though.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, if anyone thinks of any arts or dance, equivalents, let us know. Okay. So V, how you doing?
I think I'm here.
Yay!
I had to switch to my cell phone this time. The computer wasn't having it at all. Yeah. So if you can hear me, I'm here.
Yes, I can hear you. So V, going back a little bit, just real quick, tell us about your journey. Tell us about your through an educational lens. When did you start dancing? When did you start veering into other modes of artistic performance? And then what have you been working on in the past 5-8 years, probably, right?
Yeah. So I guess I can start by saying, a really long story short, my dance education from, adolescence to college was, ballet, tap, and jazz, competitions, but also kind of choppy too. At a certain point, my folks couldn't really afford the competition studio. So I did a lot kind of at my high school dance team kind of thing, fundraising, selling pizza kits and all that good stuff. And so my rigorous training didn't really start until I got to college. That, I was a kid who my mom put me in dance because I was busy. My legs were turned in and I had to wear leg braces as a kid. So it was really more of a functional decision for my mother than it was, she's going to be a dancer. I can tell. I wasn't like a protege that was nurtured and we had to figure it out. So When I got to college and I didn't know you could be a dancer and get like paid for it to be your regular 9-to-5 job. I didn't really know what I was there for. Everybody was like, what are you going to go for? I was like, dance? It was a very questionable, like automatic decision. But when I got there my freshman year, I Googled African-American dancers. Like I was very not sure what to do. I knew musicals existed and I knew you could like be, act and kind of sing, but I didn't understand the scope of the potential of being a dancer. So I Googled African-American dancers and I saw these pictures of Clifton Brown and Linda Celeste Sims of the Aileen Company. And I lost it. And that was like the beginning of an absolutely unbearable fire and an inferno that burned inside of me to continue to gain as much information as I could. So my life, my loving relationship with Pittsburgh began when I transferred to Point Park University my junior year of college. And I just kind of was eating content. Like that was really my focus, was like, I'm not exactly sure what I can do with this, but I know I need stuff. I need information. And they seemed to have a really diverse program. So I was just there eating everything I could. When I finished school, I got the phenomenal opportunity to dance for the August Wilson Center Dance Ensemble, which has been a prize of my career and a very influential and important moment for me. And during that time, I was, singing. I had a band, and so I was singing all over Pittsburgh and dancing. Every weekend I was singing or I was dancing somewhere, everywhere, all the time, constantly on a stage. So that's something that was really important and influential for me as a living artist, that I constantly had places to share and create and to be received. I always say, like my bio says, that I was, creatively blossomed in Pittsburgh and refined in Minneapolis, because it was really in Pittsburgh that opportunities and experiences for me to. Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah, just back up just a couple seconds.
Okay.
Repeat what you said.
My time in Pittsburgh was just full of nurturing. It was fertile ground. That's how I refer to it. That's how I remember it. It was constantly nurturing me to take more risks and try more things. There was always an audience that was ready and willing to hear these new ideas that I had. Shout out to Pearl Ann Porter for also planting so many seeds that, I don't know if she knows all the seeds that she planted for me to realize myself as a creative spirit, of whom, I don't know if y'all remember, or I don't know if it's still running. I don't think so. Second Saturdays, I had the phenomenal opportunity to host the music for that a couple of times. And so that really continued to spin off my confidence on creating across industries and platforms. I had an opportunity for another full-time contract in Minneapolis, in St. Paul rather, for Two Dance. So that's really what took me away from this one, from Pittsburgh, was the opportunity for another full-time dance gig that paid me Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. That's why I left. So transitioning into this new community was challenging. I danced for maybe 2 more seasons before I decided I didn't want to continue to participate in the culture of company life anymore. And that's when I started freelancing, or trying to freelance. And it was a very brutal transition, going from, living at the poverty level and trying to figure out how to make poverty level income another way, and struggling to just juggling the poverty around is pretty much what we were doing there.
Yeah.
So yeah, that experience, of using everything I could also to figure out how to make my income, and really getting versed across industries and being hired across industries, is the center of what my company is now. We provide live and virtual experiences across entertainment and wellness, to support people in nurturing and maintaining their well-being, reaching toward their own personal edge, because I feel like my entire career has been me operating on a certain edge of what I think or know I can do, developing and nurturing skills. I think that's a quote actually from Pearl Ann, just because you haven't done something before doesn't mean you don't know how to do it. So that also has been something that's kind of carried me along. So that's like long and short for the moment.
Totally. And I want to, we had touched on this, your training in dance education, did it prepare you for what you're currently doing, and in what ways did it not? Because we kind of talked about the entrepreneurship thing and what that means. So what could be better in dance education, or what did it, aid you in?
What's really funny about that is I'm actually spending time at home in Detroit where I grew up. And I actually have been going through my closet, and I found actually some of the materials I went to 2 different colleges. So I found some of the materials of what was being given to kind of like help us figure something out. It's kind of how all of the assignments I was answering kind of felt. I would say that, Point Park absolutely gave me the training to be sharp and on top of my body and the knowledge in my body. I feel like a lot of dance programs looking through, as I build curriculums for Bohemian Way, looking through, looking at the curriculum at Point Park, looking at the curriculum at Juilliard, looking at all of these top programs in the country, it's really focused on nurturing dance artists to be the best creative dance people that they can be, but that is literally only like a fraction of what it takes to operate in any industry. So it's really that industry conversation that is literally left out and not nurtured at all. And I would say that majority of the challenges that I encountered in my professional career were due to a lack of focus on anything outside of what my body was doing. So I had no knowledge, and I had no concept of what was even an average salary. Like, oh my gosh, $10,000 contract for an August to April schedule. Like, that's poverty. Like, I didn't know that I was walking into poverty. I didn't know that I was like, oh yeah, I could just get 4 more jobs and I'll be all right. I always had 4 jobs.
Right.
Always. When I was in Pittsburgh, I danced for August Wilson. I was working at 720 Music, Clothing, and Cafe as a barista. I was working downtown at, I forget the name of the pizza spot, busting tables. Like that, I told myself that was normal to do that, and not understanding that other industries like provide a salary of like, $40,000. Like, I didn't know what was like a living wage,
Right.
And the other thing I will say that is an utter letdown that I hope changes, or that I hope to influence with the work that I'm doing. Anything I'm complaining about, please know I got a plan, and I'm not just complaining. So sidebar. Leadership. A lot of the bad experiences I had in my career came from people having no leadership ability, having no leadership skills, having they were just dancers who were really great dancers who wanted to make a dance company, but they had no education on how to be leaders. And other industries, that's a part of your education. So that would be one of the contributions that I would offer up.
Yeah, real quick, I wanted to jump to Lindsay because she had commented on the knowledge about the commercial industry. So did you have any secondary comments to what V just said as far as, education?
Definitely. So many things come to mind. One of my professors in undergrad, the late Henry Edmonds, she would always say that this is business show. It's not show business, but this is business show. Mm-hmm. And that at the front of this is still a contractual agreement, services rendered for pay, and I think that that's the piece that we do have to remind dancers just in general, because it's like, people get fascinated by how many Instagram likes and how many real views and, all of those things, and not realizing none of that translates to dollars the same way that it does for musicians. That's just, in our field, it doesn't work that way. So educating the dancers on, these are the things that you need to look for inside contracts. If it's going to be on a commercial stage, if it's going to be syndicated, will you get some type of residuals? These are the things that have to also be a part of the conversation, as well as, can you hit X, Y, and Z steps? I think that a holistic education of the dance artist is probably what is even more important. This has to include networking. This has to include funding and support. This has to include use and application of technology. This has to include, self-care. Like all of these things are important, not just what happens physically on the Marley.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The body, all of this has to be, but I believe in social work, it's, wraparound or wraparound services. Like I think that the mentality has to be on the same wavelength as as those things, because like V was saying, that not having access to that information or resources to support you, it's a lot harder than it has to be. Mm-hmm. And in the year 2021, that should not still be a dance artist's struggle.
It should not.
Yeah. Right. And when you have TikTok, where people are literally all day long on their lunch breaks in store bathrooms, on, sidewalk streets, trying to learn TikTok dances. That should not, paying dancers a livable wage should not be the struggle. Like it shouldn't. Even me saying it sounds absolutely ridiculous. Mm-hmm. And I think I kind of get hyped up about it just because it is an expected reality. Like dancers are expected to accept this. And I think it's a part of the culture of the dance world that needs to just be stripped entirely. And so going back to how do these communities support, demand living wages, like we were saying earlier, why is it that a person, I kind of think of choreographers as engineers and architects, right? So why are engineers and architects of body art and visual installations, movements installations, why are they not paid wages like any other engineer?
Absolutely.
Architect?
Yeah,
and then why are the executors of this ingenuity and architecture, why are they not also compensated? The same way that their assistants would be if this was architecture or engineering. Those are the kinds of questions I think that need to be pushed as far as when you're looking at budgets for funding dance companies, when you're looking at budgets for funding creative teams. There's a lot of life source that goes into all of this and should be a part of the education, which then should also translate into the funding, performance, producing of the art itself.
Yeah, V had a comment, and then Aileen also had a brilliant comment.
Yeah, I have a few, so I'll kind of actually just like list them off without diving too deep into them. But there's a few things on what you were just saying, right, about things are harder than they need to be and they shouldn't be. The one thing I'll comment, and I'll just kind of lightning through. Last year, I was a teaching specialist at the University of Minnesota, and I remember talking to my students and asking them about something about money. I don't remember what it was, but the response overwhelmingly that I got was like, I don't do this for money. I love dance. Like dance brings me, it changes my life. And like, I got all these sentimental answers. And I was like, here's your homework. Go look at the annual budget of every organization that you want to get paid from. And you tell me which one of them is coming with the same spirit you're talking about. You think it takes not caring about money to make $2.5 million to pay you at the bottom of the totem pole? I'm sorry, I won't use that example, not a totem pole. At the end of the list. Okay? So that was one thing I want to share. I think we have a misconstrued concept of the value of money in our industry. The idea of a livable wage, I feel like sometimes what gets challenging and scary for me, and I'm observing a little bit right now, so I can really listen as much as I can, especially there's a lot of conversation for there to be unions coming in from our industry from within. And what is challenging for me as I listen before I speak right now is sometimes dancers, we're so scarred from our experiences. I'm including myself when I say this. We're so scarred from our experiences that we almost are like feral animals about being respected, you know, and we're like, you can't do that. No, you know, like we need to be compensated. And I hear that. But I think sometimes we also are not informed, those of us who haven't ever produced anything before, on what it takes to do that, right? So one example I can give is there was a lot of really angry energy, which was very necessary last year due to COVID and workshops being canceled, intensives being canceled. And there was this one particular example of 2 programs that were being like, you know, they were hoisted up in conversation of like, this organization is wrong because they won't give me a full refund. This is unacceptable. We need to boycott them. This organization gave me a full refund. You should be like them. And I looked and I listened and I said, what's the main difference between these two? They have a brick and mortar. They don't. Y'all got to pay attention. You can't, they shouldn't be using our tuition to pay their bills. No, baby, what you think the money's for? That's what it's for. It's to pay the people. So I think again, we there's a lot that we need to kind of reformat here, and we also need to think about the demand of a living wage in an industry that nationally our industry doesn't have the value to make the demand for the income that we deserve. So that's another thing we need to sort out as well. And the last thing I want to say is the ways in which I feel like I feel tossed about by this, by being an independent artist. I don't have an annual budget yet. I would love to pay dancers $40,000 a year, but I can't yet. So we need to increase our awareness of the layers and the levels. Dancers need to have a context of annual budgets. You have to understand that when your friend is a choreographer who just got a single grant, they can't pay you the same thing that, you know, a full company that has a $500,000 budget can pay you. So you can't make the same across the board demand from everyone. And so I look at the companies, some of the companies I've danced for, and say, okay, boo, y'all over here paying me $300 a week because that's what you can afford. Babe, you don't need 12 dancers. You don't need 12. You don't need 12. You can pay 7. You can pay 6, but you don't need 12. So we have to all kind of make some adjustments here from the dancers and our knowledge base, and also those of us who are running organizations and institutions. We got to be a little more realistic. We can't all accomplish every dream without us there step, you know, to them.
Well, also, I think what the audience expects to see, you know, they're expecting to see a 24-person company. And it's like, that is not the way it's running these days, you know?
No.
So, yeah. Okay, so I have Aileen, do you mind if I'm going to pass over real quick? But it's a question for everyone. And Max, we had talked about you and your daughter, and you had talked about how she's a dancer and you want her to learn programming as well. For everyone, kind of this idea of how technology and dance can help facilitate all of the issues we just brought up. So is there any dream big space? We talked about a little bit about space, a center, real estate, arts education, and the, you know, programming. Is there any intersection there where dance and technology can start to feed each other in a way that is collaborative and creates more sustainable environments, instead of dance using technology or technology using a dancer? You know, how can both start to shift and change each other? And Max, didn't know if you had any big dream concepts as you think about your daughter, and then anyone else.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, the conversation that Shana's talking about is, she had kind of asked me a similar question on my thoughts. And when she asked the question, my very first thought was my daughter. She's a dancer. She does classical dance, hip hop dance, ballet. But again, I'm a software developer at this point, and I want her to be a computer scientist, and just trying to marry the two to where she's a computer programmer and a dancer. And Bianca and Shana kind of asked me the question, like, how does it merge? And I'm like, you know, I don't know the problems in your industry. What I know is technology is built to make things easier. And just listening to your comment, V, what you just said, you like literally named 3 huge problems in the dance industry, which I'm not 100% familiar with, so I won't speak too much about it. But just listening to you speak about it passionately, you know, I would go to the drawing board with other computer programmers and say, this is their problem. You know, they need to know the value of it. Is there a way that we can make this transparent over an application, over a website? And I think when we start to think about technology as a partner in everything we do, then some of these solutions can be made. If there wasn't an app, create an app that would solve these type of issues in dance. And I think that's how you merge it. I was telling Shayna and Bianca, like when I talk to my daughter, I'm like, what are the problems? What are the problems? And one of the examples we were speaking of, when my daughter's young, you know, kids may miss practice. They have other responsibilities at that young age, the homework, tutoring, or they could just be on punishment for not doing good in school or whatever. And she would say, hey, if so-and-so misses the dance, it messes up the whole team because now we got a new teacher. And I'm like, well, what if you created a video app where you could play it for her when she's not there? She can practice at home in her room. Those are the things I just want her to think about, how to take these problems and use technology as a partner in whatever you're doing to address. I mean, that's pretty much what Cash App does and PayPal. All of the things that we utilize now are made to make our lives easier. And if these are really systemic issues in dance, then I'm sure in some of those problems easier.
That's
Yeah.
dope.
Anyone have any other thoughts, ways of integrating?
I mean, that sounds like a whole concept. Aileen.
I guess one thing I might say is just that, like, we really have seen, you know, over the last year and a half in working with our students with disabilities, how, you know, in terms of what Max is saying about critical solutions to systemic problems, how much the technology has supported accessibility and inclusion, and that's got to stick, because there are children dancing now who really face tremendous impediments to participation before this technology was so widely accessible and available, and before all of us as educators, you know, Bianca's teaching in a studio with students who are there in person with her, and she's zooming out to students who are at home. You know, that model should continue as a way to keep, you know, for us, it's young people dancing who may otherwise face these really significant obstructions. So I think in terms of accessibility and inclusion, there's tremendous responsibility and opportunity, you know, through tech. Yeah.
I will say just super quickly that we did touch on this in our conversation with Max. You know, I think this year has been so challenging just in terms of, you know, all of a sudden there were all of these children who were forced to master technology, who had never, some of them didn't even have computers. That happened a lot in New York City, where they were trying to find devices and send devices home. And then all of a sudden your grandparents and your parents and your foster parents and whoever was home with you was trying to teach you how to work this machine that you'd never worked before. And so it was like a big leap. And, you know, I feel the intersection was really amazing, because between art and technology, between dance and technology, because like Aileen was saying, you know, if your mom can't drive you, what happens? You end up dropping out. If you can't afford a Metro card, you end up dropping out. And you could be the most talented person. I mean, I can't tell you how much talent I've seen bloom through a screen. And now we're sort of moving to this place where it's like, okay, well, now we're back in person. Now we're creating, now we can take you to the next level instead of having lost you. Mm-hmm. So it's just like really important to keep all of these sort of options. What Max said really resonated with me. Like, how do we solve the problems? What options are open to us? And how can we help and uplift each other to stay connected and to stay creative when we don't all have resources? Because it's not that way, but we do need resources. And we do also need to make more than $40,000. And we need to, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, like, there are many things that need to be improved, but we need support in art and technology in order to move into the future in order to make it a more equitable and sustainable place. So
interesting. Oh, I'm sorry. You can go. I'm sorry.
Real quick, I just want to add something that kind of ties into that. I think more of a sense of beginning, middle, end completion for arts people. I've noticed the difference for those of us who practice in school, creating our art on a timeline. Folks who I think that we kind of, when we get out of school, we kind of lose that sense, and we don't. And I think it's important because if we want to make more demands in the marketplace for what we're making, we have to have a better concept of what the beginning, middle, end process is for making anything at all, to understand how money is, how it gets paid out. Some people are going to get paid more than other people, period. But why and in what context? And so something that that Lindsay was saying, that as we're talking through this conversation, right, the idea of creating a platform or an app, because we already know the next generation is, I was just watching my friend, her son, watching YouTube, watching TikToks on YouTube. Like, that is so far away from how I grew up and watched and was entertained. Like, I don't even know what that is. But the idea that we could create an app or a website to give kids a concept of how to create a treatment, what happens in post-production, which is really where most projects fall off. People never finish stuff because they don't understand how rigorous the post-production process is into the submission process of film, right? What if that is a platform or a website in and of itself? Because right now, all of those processes, like, I'm working through that right now. I'm literally in post-production for a film I just shot in September. So I don't know. I'm like, I've made music videos before, but I've never made a short film. So I'm in the middle of figuring out my marketing rollout as I'm finishing post, how do I know what's important for all of, so, and again, I think that dancers is specifically having a context of understanding how to make a certain demand financially, but also those of us who are the producers, who are becoming producers, understanding how to get stronger leverage for our projects. I think that having some way for a more, having a more consistent capacity for beginning, middle, end, like that practice of a beta test of things in the arts brain can help us in both directions.
And absolutely, and just to add on to what you're saying and what Aileen put into the chat earlier, another very clear example of that is teaching. Aileen wrote this, right? Like, how many of us, I was a professional dancer, and I can't tell you how many times I was thrown into situations where all of a sudden I was the teacher. And no one ever talked to me about being a teacher before. No one ever, they just assumed, because you have taken 1 billion classes in your life, that you can walk in and lead many people of different ages, of different levels, with, disabilities, with, like, there are so many things that go into teaching. Public school system, private education, it doesn't really matter, but we don't really get that focus. Like, you're not, when you're going to school to, like, be a dancer, where's the focus on, like, oh, well, like you're saying, like, what are you going to do after? Let's talk about post-production. Let's talk about how you're going to teach. Let's talk about teaching young people and older people. Let's talk about, there's so many different beautiful professions that come from being an artist that nobody ever really addresses until you're in it. And then you don't have the leadership skills, like you're saying, V, and then you're kind of stuck. And then you're of course doing things just for however much money somebody's going to get you, because you are not going to say, this is what I did. I'm trained. I know what's going on. I know that I deserve more. Right? So, like, where's that support system so that you can actually go into some place and advocate for yourself and get the respect that you deserve because you've worked so hard all your life? There's a little bit of the infrastructure is not always there for artists, but.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to wrap up here. This is so wonderful and bubbling, and I love it. I have one last kind of general question. A lot of what, I hope she doesn't mind, I'm going to quote her, Beth Corning is a choreographer here in Pittsburgh. And we were on a random, kind of institutional talk last year on Zoom. And she brought up that in Pittsburgh in particular, and I'm assuming in multiple other places, that small arts organizations are the backbone of a lot of what comes out of this city. And a lot of the funding goes to the large organizations, which are fewer in number, but there's many more in the small arts. Which I mean, based on my experience in New York, that was similar. I mean, you could dance for so many independent choreographers. The big companies are fewer. My question is, based on that, and kind of this, who provides the programming? Who provides the professional development? Who provides the apps that we're talking about? Who, aside from entrepreneurs that can possibly generate it themselves, but obviously that's going to take funding and research and all these things. So what are some larger, and this is again kind of dream big situation, larger either institutions or organizations or corporations or schools? What is it that we could try to convince to invest in programming, not just funding, not just supporting? How can they get invested in what we're trying to do together? Thoughts?
Can you
If I can, oh, sorry.
Nope. Go ahead. I'm gonna figure it out through this.
Oh, okay. So I think that, and I've written some grants. I've received grants. I've been in partnership with agencies that have acted as fiduciary agents, which I am grateful for to this day and beyond. But I think a lot of what we're going to need to happen in the future is not wait for pie in the sky, right? Not wait for this big bucket rainfall to happen. There's a lot of subscription-based services. There are a lot of crowd-funded large projects. And I think a lot of it's going to have to require the support base and network to fiscally support the arts. Because, and I remember saying this, Shauna, with our earlier conversation, when people were locked in their houses for unknown gobs of time, what were they doing? They were listening to music. They were watching endless marathons on, streaming services. They were going through and learning all the TikTok dances. They were watching PBS rebroadcast, dance concerts and operas from, I don't even know how long ago. I remember seeing some of the same ones that I had seen when I was, a little girl watching PBS. So I think that a lot of it is we need to require these crowds, these audiences who get more life from what we're producing and offering to be financially invested in what we're doing in the arts.
Yeah. Other thoughts or comments?
Well, I do think it starts with K-12 public education. I think it starts there because it, unless you plant those seeds in young people where they understand that arts are core and central in their learning, in their humanity, in their lives, it's so easy for us to rely totally on arts as the way forward and as our survival mechanism, and never name that and never value that and never, expect artists to work because they're passionate about it, because they love to do it, but not to actually be compensated. I mean, all of that I think is perpetuated by an education system that puts arts on the periphery, right? So really robust arts education, as integral to public education, I think helps us get there. I think it helps us assign appropriate value to the arts in our society, right? As a tool for change.
Yeah, and Max, we had also talked about briefly, you work for the city of Pittsburgh. You're in the mayor's office. Similar idea. What does that support do for your program? And is there well, we had actually talked about they might be developing a cultural representative for the arts, a liaison in the mayor's office, maybe for the next term or something like that. But can you speak to like how that helps do what you do, you know, that kind of support?
Yeah, sure. I mean, prior to working at the city, I was doing similar work. Just the power of government, people in positions of power to get a response, to get somebody to answer back is definitely helpful in the process. So, I had talked to you guys about how I would send 1 million emails out to companies, Google, Amazon, say, hey, look, we're doing some really cool stuff. Can you guys support it? I wouldn't necessarily get an email back, but once I got the position with the city and I was able to, CC somebody, the mayor, or even, one of the chief of staff, or somebody just important who was really connected at a high level, it was much easier to have these conversations. And then, the weird thing or the funny thing is, once you actually get in the room and you have your conversation, you tell them what, this is what I was trying to tell you the whole time. It's like, oh, great, we'll support that. Believe it or not, there are people in those higher places that don't know exactly what's going on because they're probably running their company. It's important though to make those connections and to get into certain rooms where those change makers can actually help with the programming, help with the investing and the funding. And usually, just based on the conversation we had tonight, as long as you get passionate, meaningful people in those positions to have those conversations, it's usually an easy conversation once you get there. I think the whole problem is to get there and to have the conversation and be able to tell the right people what's really going on at the ground level. So I would definitely say that for me, my position has been made easier by being able to reach out and say, hey, I'm trying to have a conversation with this company. And they say, hey, no problem. I know the assistant director over there, the executive director of the whole thing, and we'll get you on the line with them. Absolutely. So, and earlier we were talking about companies. I would go, I think there's room for all this in tech. And I think the interesting thing with me, with research and information is that on one end, we're talking about how something as valuable as dance is not being compensated properly. And then on the other end or the other spectrum, you can read a newspaper. I just read something that said Elon Musk made $250 billion, right? So in between those two spaces, there are the finances to make these things happen. Again, it's how do you get Elon Musk on the phone, right? Who do we know who knows Elon Musk? But I do think that if you get in the right rooms with the right people, and like I said, passionate people like we have on this call are speaking for the culture of dance and things like that, then these conversations aren't as hard as they may seem. It's just we're so disconnected. Everybody's doing their own thing. You guys are working on what you're working on, and I'm sure, I would assume he's working on what he's working on. So just breaking down these barriers and having these conversations, I think is helpful though.
Yeah. Can I just real quick, Lindsay, did you say the name of that program earlier and I missed it?
Yeah, no problem. Dosabama, Dance on Screen, Alabama. I started it last year, actually in the midst of COVID, to help people, understand the dance on screen process from, start to finish.
Who's the target audience for that? Like, is that for me? Can I join? Or is this like a young people thing?
Because I would say that really any age, just like Max was talking about, coding, like people can code. It's I wouldn't say that it's the same, but in terms of the application of technology inside the process is very similar, so no matter what age you are. Last year we focused on pre-professional. As our target audience. We had creative directors. We had 4 creative directors, Jewel Lane, Caramac, Jana Tompkins, yes, and also Jay Staten. So yeah, it was like a big family reunion. They were all able to offer their areas of expertise, from being in the concert world, touring worldwide, commercial dance, like all of the different components. so that those people who were participating in the program were able to see in real life and in real time, like how this works. And then we had our dance festival, and we had submissions actually from all over the world, thankfully. That was pretty amazing. And some of the students were actually able to be a part of Kara Mack's start to finish her dance film.
Wow.
So it's kind of hybrid. So there's a component that is, a lot of the instruction is completely online. And then when the artists have their residencies, they pick from the cast of participants to be a part. Yeah.
And so now we're working on the app.
Yes. In fact, I in our chat, I said, Max, please, by all means, send me your email address.
Word.
The quarantine, I had to really, brush up on Canva, Wix, like all of the things that are user friendly. So yes, that is the next step, is to be able to utilize that as a bigger platform so that it can be available.
Word. All right. I just wanted to get that information out there.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you for that.
Because we were in the chat, but I was like, we need to make sure everybody hears all of this.
Yes, and you can join our email list either by going on the website doseofbama.com or doseofbama@gmail.com. DOSABAMA.
And Crystal has definitely been representing, because she's been dropping all of your websites and beautiful articles about you in the Zoom chat for everybody to
Thank you, Crystal.
Yeah, so thank you everyone for coming. I feel like that's a great note. The future, hybrid, building all these things together. So thank you to all of our panelists. It's been such a pleasure hearing from you and talking to you. Thank you for joining us. And to my friend Bianca, thanks for co-moderating. And yeah, we will, if anyone has any questions, feel free to email shanasimmonsdance@gmail.com. And, we can get you connected to the right links, whatever you need. So thank you everyone on Zoom for all of your comments and thoughts and questions, and we'll have a good night. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for having me. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me as well.